Nancy?
I just wanted to ask about the test, and if anyone who has a 6 in their tri-type, are they going to automatically get the messages, the little asterisks?
Yeah.
So anybody who has 6. So I think one of them, isn't one worded something along the lines of your, not just your head type is likely to be a 6, but that your lead type is likely to be a 6. So I'm wondering if that's, how do you differentiate between somebody who is actually a 4-6-8 versus a 6-4-8 or an 8-4, any variation of those things?
That is such a great question, because when I decided to have that programmed in, all of them have not been programmed, but the really overt ones for the 6, but there are some for the 9 that are just important, but are harder to name because both 6 and 9 are consistently inconsistent. But what's different about the 2 is that the 9 will say, well, I can do that also, and I can do that. And they're adding on.
Mm-hmm.
And so they might have had a choice set up based on their own choices in the very beginning. Let me go back and say what most people don't realize is how complex this test is. I gave you 3 Enneagram cards for each Enneagram type, and you had to choose which Enneagram card you put at the top, in the middle, and the bottom. Then later, the cards are served to you according to your choices. So there is a pattern for the test of having options, but let's say you had to choose between 3, 7, and 8 at the very beginning of the test. Well, it's going to be your top 3 card, your top 7 card, and your top 8 card. For another person, they could have chosen something altogether different. So if you think about it mathematically, already there's a huge distinction. So even though it might say you tested as a 3, 7, 8, but are you going to have the same cards as someone else? No, it's very important to know which cards, which is why I have the option on the left to click on the tri-type so you can see which cards you chose. And if you want to see when you had the choice point, you go to the show answers, because it's really, really important. Now, is there someone that's not a 6 that will have a lot of asterisks? Yes, if they have 9 and 6 in the tri-type, they might lead with another type. Or it can be a 9, but it will be the 9 that's more doubting because of the 6 in the tri-type. But because they're adding, you can do that too. So if they're given the playoff between their own cards as to what's at the top and their second choice, then they reorder it one time, and then later in the test, because of their choices, those 2 come up again and you choose the opposite one, the computer picks that up automatically as consistently inconsistent. So it knows you're 6 or a 9. Now, some people just don't know themselves well enough, and they can have a bunch of different answers. But there are 4 ways that I'm doing that with the Enneagram cards, and then 2 ways I'm doing that with written sentences. So it's evaluating all of them. Every time you were given the 3, what order did you put them in? And one significant piece is that some people test better with the pictures and the words, and others with the phrases. And what we want to see is how many times you had a different top choice. So if you had 3 or more top choices, like in one stacking of your first choice cards, you had the 3, and then in the stacking column right next to it, you had 7. And then in the tri-type, your first stacking was 4, and then your second stacking was 3. Now you have 1 4 card, 1 7 card, and 2 3 cards. And then when I asked you the questions, if you then had another type as dominant, then already you're a 6 or a 9, because you're also trying to have balance. You're very much trying to balance things out. But whereas the 9 is adding, oh, I can do that, and they're nonchalant about it. The 6 is saying, well, I'm not that, and I'm not that. Well, wait, what is the test doing? Yeah, I'm this too sometimes, depends on the situation. Then they're going to have a similar testing pattern. But what's helpful to understand is they're going to struggle with all testing instruments because the same pattern plays out. Now, if it's an instrument where you're ranking on a 5-point system, meaning 5 the most obvious or most true of you, and 1 the least true of you, you get the 6s and 9s where they'll choose the middle line a lot. So I have to deliberately leave that out, or the 6 and 9s won't differentiate. But it does help in the process of the session to clarify that by defining the adjectives. Spencer, anything you'd add?
I mean, I was just going to have a simple answer. It's not really, it's not incredibly consistent because we can be inaccurate about what order people are doing. But I would just encourage people to think of think, feel, act. So your heart types are going to feel, your head types are going to think, your gut types are going to act. So if you're curious what order someone is, what do? I know I personally act, then feel, then think about if I should have done it that way. 8, 4, 6. So it's not a slam dunk because the person could be, they might not identify with the order you think they do things in. But if you want to know the actual order, that can be a very easy shortcut if answered correctly. What do you do first? Think, feel, act. What do you do second? What do you do third? That's going to identify the order of the centers and therefore the order of your tri-type.
And the only time it's complicated is if someone has a 6 or a 9, because the 6 doesn't realize that they're hesitating, and that's thinking. But they may notice that they'll go into reaction, so they might think they act first, or they could have an emotional reaction to what's happening. So they could think that they feel first. But as the observer, you're going to notice if they hesitate for a second and go look at the scenario before they answer that question. And then with the 9, they're determining if they're going to act or not act, move, not move. So they might think that they're thinking or feeling when actually they're in kind of a position of inaction. So it doesn't seem like they're acting. But other than those 2 variables, which are important since most people are 3, 6, 9, it's the most common tri-type. And then the other combinations are having a hexad type, the 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, and 7, which are just the wings of the 3, 6, and 9. So it gives that individuality. But yeah, it's a really think, feel, act, think, feel. Spencer acts, then feels, then thinks, whereas I act and I think about it and I go, wait, I guess I was feeling that. But feeling comes third for me. I'm also the T in Myers-Briggs, and he's the F. So I have noticed a pattern with that for what it's worth.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, did I answer everything, Nancy?
Yes, thank you.
Okay,